Hello and welcome to Spotlight. Tensions are rising in the West Asia region as the United States steps up its military buildup around Iran, while Tehran carries out near daily drills, saying it's prepared to counter any attack. On the diplomatic front, U.S. President Donald Trump says that he's given Iran 10 days to reach a deal, but Iran has repeatedly rejected threats and coercion, insisting that diplomacy cannot succeed under pressure or intimidation. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign minister says Washington has not demanded zero enrichment in the talks, and that Tehran will submit its draft agreement within days. That and more on tonight's edition of Spotlight with our guests. Author, journalist, and producer Sakina Datoo joining us from the British capital, London. And we also have radio host and journalist at CPR News, Mr. DeBar, joining us from New York. Well, welcome to the program to both of our guests. Let's start off with Miss Datoo in the British capital, London. Miss Datoo, we're seeing a sharp rise, of course, in threats from Washington and a massive U.S. military buildup near and off the coast of Iran. But as we mentioned in our intro, Iran has repeatedly rejected threats and coercion, saying that diplomacy cannot succeed under pressure or intimidation. What are your thoughts in this regard? Is the U.S. trying to pressure Iran into further concessions? Because Tehran has always demanded clarity in this regard.
I think, if you listen to Trump in particular and his threats against Iran, you have to take everything that Trump says with a pinch of salt. So there is obviously the truth in the fact that he is threatening. On one hand, you are negotiating with someone, you are trying to reach a peace deal, and then the language is so confrontational that you're constantly threatening. But this is not something new. I think this is something that we have seen from Trump time and again. And I think, more than him threatening Iran, he's probably positioning himself and he is talking to other people, probably Israel, probably people within. And this language is used not only, I think, for Iran. In terms of, I think, hearing today about the zero enrichment was not mentioned in Geneva, as Arakshi mentioned today, I think this is an interesting a development for me. I mean, I particularly think that that there are questions of the red lines. Every time we were talking about, the ballistic missiles, for example, these were not negotiable. And I have always believed that this attack at some point will come. But it also is possible with this latest, knowledge of U.S. has not asked for zero enrichment, that I think both sides are probably pushing it. Now, of course, nobody wants a war. When there is a war, it's the innocent people who suffer the most. There are going to be tons of people dying. And of course, a lot of other repercussions, which we'll talk about. But I think at this stage, both of them, both Iran and the U.S., are probably trying to find a way to save, to get away from this war. For Trump, of course, it is saving face. We also know that, the Zionists are the ones who are pushing for this war. And with the Epstein files, we've come to know the kind of hold they have on all their leaders on how they push for a war on Iran. This has been going on for years now. And that there is a lot of material on Trump. And so I think he is trying to find a way to appease this group of people, because he also knows very clearly that when he goes to war with Iran, it's not going to be a piece of cake. It's going to probably bring down his presidency with everything going on with Epstein files, but also the ICE chaos that we saw in the U.S. I think people dying and soldiers going back in coffins back home, I think will probably be the last straw, not to mention the mess up of the Western economy that will result from this. So I don't think that maybe he is trying to find a way not to go to war, but then a lot of other forces are really pushing for that.
DeBar, recently Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi said the U.S. has not asked Tehran for permanent zero enrichment during the Oman-mediated talks. Tehran had earlier stressed that Washington's insistence on zero enrichment would lead to no deal. Zero nuclear weapons seems like a better talking point, doesn't it? If that's what the U.S. Is really concerned about, why not keep that at the core of negotiations?
Yeah, and by the way, extend that to Israel, by the way. Have them get rid of their nuclear weapons, which they already have, at least more than 100. It's interesting also looking at hot arrests today, for example. Apparently, the U.S. is speaking with the Saudis about the Saudis being allowed to enrich uranium, which apparently was not permitted before or beyond some level. In other words, it's going to be enhanced. This pretty much the same thing that's under discussion with Iran right now. And looking at Al Arabiya and Al Jazeera, the way they're portraying, the presentation that we've seen. RT also, just like the headline on PressTV's website, the parties essentially, well, Iran is saying they haven't told us that we need zero enrichment, and nobody from the State Department is contradicting that. I think your other guest is exactly right, that what's happening is you see these two parties or multiple parties trying to, fumble their way through a minefield of political problems to get to a point where they can reach an agreement to avoid a war and perhaps even, reach some agreements that enrich both parties or multiple parties. Here in the United States, the government consists of the president and the Congress and the court system. The Congress makes a lot of policy and also handles the purse strings and has the power to make war, at least under the Constitution. It is evenly split between Democrats and Republicans, and out of that, the majority right now, although it's Republicans by a razor-thin margin, there are some Republicans who vote with the Democrats on policy and who you can consider, in essence, this group here are friends of Trump or supporters of Trump, and this group are opponents of Trump. And there is probably a majority of opponents in the Congress, which includes a small part of the Republicans. Those parties answer to their constituents, and all of these issues that have been percolating for years, for example, Iran, at least since 1979 here in the media, they have all these positions that are staked out as long-term positions, and these politicians have to go back to those people and explain events in the context of where they were yesterday. And so what that means is there's almost no constituency for peace with Iran in terms of the overall narrative, and yet no one here wants to go to war with Iran. And you have the pressure from the Israelis and AIPAC and the entire group that's behind wanting this war in the first place, and Netanyahu, by the way, saying, oh, by the way, I'm not going to war with Iran today because the United States isn't, but I'm going to war with everybody else. I'm going to war with Lebanon. And so there's a whole lot of very dangerous stuff going on, and I think very mature, I hate to include Trump in that, but it's very mature diplomacy going on at the moment that I hope is going to prevail.
Ms. Datoo, the manner that Iran has pursued the talks has been in line with international norms. And let's not forget that Washington was the one that left the nuclear deal, but Iran never closed the door to diplomacy. The skepticism has always been on the intent of the U.S. Do you think that the U.S.'s return to the negotiating table is rather indicative that sanctions, threats, and coercion against Iran did not, in fact, produce the results that Washington was looking for?
I mean, there is absolutely no doubt about the fact that none of that has worked against Iran. I mean, any other country with the years of sanctions that have been put through them, not to mention what they recently did with the Mossad agents internally in the country trying to destabilize Iran, without using any military force, none of this has worked. And so, the only option really they have is either war or negotiations. And of course, like I said, before, if U.S. was to wage war on Iran, Iran is not Syria, Iran is not Iraq. They can't just go in and destabilize and come out. And Iran has made it very clear there's going to be no just hit and run here. If America attacks any piece of land, even a tiny bit of Iran is attacked, then it's a fully fledged war. And in this war, the West has got a lot to lose. I mean, the economy in the West is already suffering. Just by closing, for example, the Strait of Hormuz will ensure that, the oil and gas prices will go through the roof. And of course, all the other, aspects that I mentioned before. And the destabilization of the region will also occur. It's also very interesting, I think, with now not just the BRICS countries, but the West Asian countries, the way they're coming together. And, also the fact that Iran at the moment is a logistic hub for Eurasia. And all these factors ensure that it is not so simple, for Trump to just wage a war. And so I think he is trying to find a solution. The major problem with this is, I think, we need to know a lot of things that have become clear from Epstein files. And we've come to know that successive presidents of the United States have been blackmailed, to go to war or to put sanctions on Iran, to somehow find a way to destabilize Iran. And they succumb to that because of the, logistics and stuff that we've come to know now through Epstein files. And of course, it is quite clear to everybody, even though it's not been directly revealed, that Trump is very much in that list. So what they are holding against him and whether they will really allow him to find any kind of a compromise is questionable. The talk, as you hear from Israel, the statements coming out of them continuously push this agenda and the psychological war at the same time. So I think, yes, they have tried all other means. It wasn't as simple as, going and taking out Maduro. They can never do that in Iran. And also, apart from the other military factors, and the fact that Iran is one of the oldest civilizations, the reality of the fact that Iran is an Islamic republic with the kind of Islam that is quite different, really, in the region. This is the land that calls itself the land of Imam Hussein. And people are not dying, afraid of dying. I mean, if there is a war and it is waged, whether Iran wins or loses, on the surface of it, it's a win for Iran. We've heard Arakchi recently talk about the fact that he's ready to give his life because that would be martyrdom for him. So Trump is facing, or the US and the Westerners are facing a kind of ideology in Iran which really they cannot win against. So I think this is the reason they are trying to hold on to anything in order not to go to war. But as long as the Zionists are in charge and they've got stuff on Trump, I fear that, he may not have any other choice but to take this step.
Don DeBar, Iran and Russia, they held joint naval exercises in the Sea of Oman and the Northern Indian Ocean. The stated objectives of these drills was to boost bilateral military cooperation and security in the region. How significant were these drills regarding their timing as well? And what message were they sending, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, again, we have this very complex messaging system, I guess, right? You have the domestic political considerations for Trump that they're very important because his situation is so precarious. I mean, let's go back to the year before the election. They convicted him of felonies up the yin-yang, and they did everything they could to prevent him from being allowed to run, and he ran anyway, and he won. But his political condition is precarious. I'm sure every day he's looking out the window to see if they decided to say the hell with the Constitution, we're just going to drag him out and shoot him in the front yard and get him out of the way or whatever. So whatever his considerations are, you have, Netanyahu's, he has to be at war all the time or they won't need him as prime minister anymore. And then he goes right to prison. That's part of the mix with the regular stuff. That what do rational players see when they see a military alliance doing novel exercises jointly in an area that's currently under international tension? That should give anyone pause for thought. Hopefully, at the Pentagon, aside from the political appointees and the Dr. Strangeloves that gravitate towards that kind of thing, there are some actual rational military strategists who understand that it's a stupid idea to get into a war in that area at all, and that if they're trying to conquer it, the way to do it would be under siege like they've been trying to do to starve it. I would like to make one correction, just or amplification of the fact that as Iran has been, a trooper through this, like maybe historically unprecedented, Cuba and Korea, I mean actual Korea, not occupied Korea, what they call North Korea here, actual Korea, have also been under that kind of sanctions regime. And so the idea is to try to starve people into submission. I think that the smart people, if they are bent on world domination, which they seem to be, will go for the long game instead of the short game. And I see the opportunity here with Trump trying to be a hero and make peace, is that actually the sanctions could actually get lifted like they were supposed to under the JCPOA, which, by the way, never happened. And maybe there'll be some relief and even some actual commerce, rational exchanges of business between the U.S., Iran, and everyone else in the world. I'm hoping we're working our way there, but it's a minefield.
Sakina, Datoo, it's been pointed out by many that Iran must maintain its military deterrence even during negotiations. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? Because the June attacks against Iran actually took place while the Tehran-Washington negotiations were proceeding.
Oh, of course. And even if it was not for that, you can never really trust. I mean, can you ever trust, Trump and the U.S. administration? We've seen that not only in Iran, but we've seen how they have been, operating in different parts of the world in the name of peace. He has created this peace, team, which is full of thugs. I mean, you want to bring a peace through this board of peace in Palestine, in Gaza, by putting in place in that team a person who actually was responsible for demolishing it. So when they talk about peace, they actually don't mean a word of it. And so therefore, you cannot trust, Iran has got to be completely ready any minute, for war. And I actually believe that if this war happens, not advocating for war, because war is never a good thing. A lot of people die, a lot of people suffer. But if this war was to happen, I think in a way, there is such a mess in the region. There is such a lot of complicity of Gulf states, for example, in the genocide in Palestine, that in a way maybe we need this reset, because I have a lot of confidence that Iran can really change the dynamics if a war was to happen. The fact that Egypt and Iran, after 47 years, have signed at this juncture, this very sensitive time, diplomatic relations, I don't really know exactly what it means, but it does tell me that there is some kind of a massive change happening. Of course, China and Russia are behind Iran. They will have to be. It's not only because they may like or not like it, because their own survival, economic survival, geopolitical, landscape is dependent on them supporting Iran. And also other entities like, we can never really trust, again, countries like Saudi Arabia, but we've been hearing a lot of a difference of tone on how it is, talking against the UAE. But also, I mean, at the moment, I'm hearing of our Prime Minister here in the UK has refused for, our bases here to be used to launch an attack on Iran. Of course, all this could just simply be propaganda, because they are good at that, at deflection. So it may not mean a lot, but also it does signify that if there was a war was to happen, it is definitely, in my view, not an end of Iran. Iran will suffer, but it will come out stronger from this. And I think the region may actually need a reset that is so important from what we've been witnessing of this genocide, the Epstein files, the complicity of the people in the region. It's a world that sometimes, you really lose hope in. So this might be something, might end up being something positive.
DeBar, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has warned any new U.S. strike on Iran would have serious and adverse consequences, and any move in that direction would be, in his words, playing with fire. He also said Arab countries are sending clear signals to Washington, calling for restraint to prevent an escalation of tensions. Please break down those comments for us.
Well, I mean, is Russia an ally of Iran or not? We have to ask that question. What's the nature of the alliance? I say yes, and they've identified some common interests, even in the military and strategic areas. They are both large oil producers, by the way, and they're both targets of U.S. sanctions and U.S. hostility, and the U.S. of course wants to conquer and acquire the resources of each of those. On the other hand, even if this were one state, let's say there was a union of everybody but the United States republics, the policy would have to be multi-variegated. If you blow up my stuff, it doesn't necessarily mean I blow up yours. But look, everybody knows that the U.S. is running the air war in Ukraine, for example. And so when drones attack the presidential residence at the Kremlin, you can hold a caricature out of Zelensky and say he did it, or some crazy Ukrainian generals or Polish generals in a back room somewhere did it, or whatever. But everyone knows that it came out of Langley and or the Pentagon, and hopefully not Pentagon, and probably not because it failed. And yet the Russians are smart enough to know, they're like, look, our response, if we attack something in the United States, then whoever it is there that's keeping them from an all-out war is going to get the upper hand in terms of public opinion, or in any event, they're going to go for it after that. So how do we keep this, contain this problem and work things to our advantage? And by the way, our goal isn't to either conquer anyone or blow stuff up. So my consequences for you doing this thing may not be, an actual quid pro quo, in terms of it being identical in form. And so maybe it means sanctions. Maybe it means that Iran and Russia decide to make a major impact on what the oil markets are doing right now, and make some serious dents in the American and the European economies. Maybe they test better weapons in front of the U.S.'s eyes that really scares somebody in strategic planning in Washington or whatever, and makes these guys clean the government out from the crate. I don't know what happens. It's not going to be a military attack by Russia on U.S. assets. I can almost guarantee you that, because honestly, in my opinion, as justified as that would be, it would be insane.
Right, and Ms. Datoo, an issue that Mr. DeBar pointed out a little earlier, that's the sheer and undeniable hypocrisy and double standards that a regime like Israel can possess nuclear weapons without scrutiny or without cooperation with the IAEA, while Iran is being punished and scrutinized for having a monitored and legal civilian nuclear program.
These facts, sometimes back, people used to actually buy into the propaganda when we used to hear, oh, because, Israel is defending itself and therefore, they can have the nuclear weapons because they are the only democracy in the Middle East. All these propaganda really, the curtains have been lifted and people have come to really realize what Israel is and what Iran is. Today, Iran, I think, enjoys a public support, global public support in a manner that I don't believe Iran ever has. Whereas if you look at the rating for Israel, the Zionist entity is plummeted crazily. And so everyone can clearly understand that it is Israel who has attacked multiple nations, continues to attack multiple nations at one time. So there is any entity really that should not possess nuclear weapons, it should be Israel, whereas Iran has never really attacked anybody before. And also, I think, when we're talking about this war, there has been a lot of discussion about the fact that all this at the moment is just to push time until Trump visits China. He's expected to visit, China at the end of March and early April. And based on the discussion that he has with the Chinese president, will determine whether they're going to attack Iran or not. Of course, all these things, we cannot verify for sure. And the Western media keeps beating the drums. We are hearing the war is imminent as early as tomorrow. So a lot of propaganda goes on around the West, and there are many, many factors that are in play. But the propaganda, I think, of the Western media, of Western politicians and governments has become very, very clear day and light. People around the world look up to Iran, and therefore I think whatever games they play, whatever it is that they decide was the reason why they're going to attack Iran, most of the people around the globe do not see it as legitimate. And there is a lot of support for Iran. People look up to this country. It's beyond Iran. I think what happens in the next few days is not just going to affect Iran or the region. There are many, many countries that do not want to do the bidding of the United States, but they are scared. And they're looking for somebody to be able to challenge them so that they can take initiative from there. And I think if Iran is able to do this, this will really open a new chapter for global, I think, independence. And so it remains to be seen. But definitely,
Right.
the propaganda of the West has always been there.
Let's get a quick thought in from Mr. DeBar before we wrap up the show. Please, Mr. DeBar, give us your thoughts on the issue of the hypocrisy. And also, I want you to address the elephant in the room here, and that's, of course, the Israeli efforts to sabotage these negotiations.
I think we can settle all of that. Look, I'm no military strategist, okay? And in fact, I've never been in the military by choice. And so, this is a talking head in New York. He's been following this stuff his whole life. I think the solution to the problem, if it had to come to a military response to an Israeli attack, would be to take out the Perez Negev facility, they call the Mona, which is, the super secret laboratory where they create all these weapons, nuclear weapons supposedly in Israel. Just vaporize that completely, make an unmistakable, statement, just like the U.S. has done several times and Israel has done several times in Iran over nuclear facilities. Only look, this is a nuclear power. The whole world knows it. They're at war with 4 or 5 countries around them at a time. They're monkeying around with the U.S. government on an ongoing basis and threatening the president.
Okay.
And then they attacked. And so here's our response. And it would be interesting. If they have to do military, which I hope they don't, that might be a good one.
Okay, thanks a lot. That's all the time we have for tonight's show. Thanks to my guests, author, journalist, and producer Sakina Datoo, joining us from the British capital, London, and radio host and journalist at CPR News, Mr. Don DeBar, speaking to us from New York. And, of course, a special thanks to you, our viewers, for staying with us on tonight's edition of Spotlight. It's good night for now, and see you next time.